Hey guys, today I'll show you a crime film, murder mystery. Spoiler ahead, watch out and take care. This film shows a glimpse of what might happen if you are extremely wealthy. It made me wonder if family feuds like this happen in real life in wealthy families. It is a light film with a dark plot that will confuse you who the real killer is, and it feels nice to be a detective sometimes. It also showcases a nice yacht with exquisite living and other expensive items that would make somebody kill for it. Nick is a police officer in New York, and his wife Audrey works in the salon. Nick had promised at their wedding that they will visit Europe, but Audrey thinks they never will. The main characters came from a simpler way of living and got tangled in a family feud because one nice man that they met on a plane offered them a vacation, so next time be careful of talking to strangers. Overall, the movie is fun to watch. I have enjoyed it from the edge of my seat, and I would like to share that with you. The movie starts with Nick updating Jimmy, his best friend, that he failed his detective exam again. Nick asks Jimmy to lie to Nick's wife about his failure. Audrey, Nick's wife, is telling her coworkers at the salon that her husband stops doing romantic things for her. Audrey says that it is their 15th wedding anniversary, and she is still waiting for the Europe trip that Nick promised on their wedding day. Audrey's coworkers advise her that she should remind her husband about the promise. Nick is in the convenience store shopping for his wife's anniversary gift. Nick buys a greeting card, $50 Amazon gift card, and cheaper allergy medication. When Nick lines up to the cashier, he suspects the boy in front of him of shoplifting. Nick reveals to the boy that he is a policeman and tells the boy to return the items. Nick and Audrey treat Jimmy with his wife for their anniversary dinner, and it is obvious that Nick is conservative about their dinner budget. Audrey asks Jimmy and Nick about their jobs, and Nick continues to lie about his job. Audrey notices the new diamond ring on Jimmy's wife. Nick gets insecure, and he promises his wife that he has something better for her. After the dinner, Audrey irritably asks Nick about his wedding promise. Nick improvises and surprises his wife that they are going to Europe. Nick and Audrey go to the airport. Nick shows the flight attendant a coupon for an upgrade, but the flight attendant refuses the coupon. They continue to board the plane and sit in the economy class. Audrey reads a book, and it is noticeable that she finds her husband irritating. Nick sleeps and is loudly snoring, so Audrey asks the flight attendant for earplugs. The flight attendant charges $9 for the earplugs, so Audrey refuses the offer. Audrey walks to the first class of the plane, and she steals earplugs from a sleeping passenger. Audrey enjoys herself in the first class bar, and Charles initiates a conversation with her. The flight attendant notices Audrey and warns her that she should stay in the lower class. Charles introduces himself to the flight attendant and tells her that Audrey is his guest. The flight attendant politely leaves, and the gesture impresses Audrey. Audrey continues her conversation with Charles, and her husband wakes up. Charles talks about his ex-fiancée who left him for his richer uncle. Nick finds his wife talking to Charles, and Nick shows his police badge to the flight attendant. Nick tells the flight attendant that he needs to break up wife's conversation with Charles. Nick barges into the first class, and Charles introduces himself to Nick. Audrey tells Nick that Charles is inviting them over to spend the weekend on a yacht with Charles' family. Nick says that they have plans for the weekend. Audrey talks to her husband privately and convinces him that they should accept Charles's offer. Nick and Audrey accept Charles's offer, and they go to the yacht. Susie, Charles's ex-fiancée, notices that Charles is drunk and asks him why he brings extra visitors. Susie walks out, and Charles apologizes to Nick and Audrey. Toby, Charles's cousin, walks down the stairs, and Charles introduces his guests to Toby. Charles asks his cousin if they have a spare cabin for his guests. While staying in the cabin, Audrey gets allergies and asks Nick for her medicine. Nick gives her the cheap medicine, and Audrey complains that the medicine would not work for her. Nick and Audrey go out to the deck, and they see Susie and Charles arguing. Nick and Audrey guess what the ex-couple is arguing about, and Grace butts into Nick and Audrey's conversation. Nick is starstruck by Grace, and he starts talking about Grace's films. Audrey tries to relax her husband because Nick is attracting too much attention. Audrey starts researching about Grace, and she is appreciating Grace's facial features. Charles tells Audrey that Grace had surgical operations done to her face. The Colonel and Sergei, his bodyguard, tries to remove Nick and Audrey from the boat. Charles prevents it and insults the Colonel. Charles introduces Maharajah Vic to the couple. Audrey and Nick introduce themselves to Vic, and Audrey says that his husband is a detective. Audrey starts insulting her husband's skills, and Nick insults her back. The boat staff prepares an elegant buffet for the guests. Juan Carlos enters the room, and Vic introduces Nick and Audrey to him. Nick and Audrey try to have a conversation with him, but they realize Juan Carlos cannot understand English. A cabin crew presents a dagger to the guests. Charles tells Audrey the history of the dagger being gifted to their family by Marco Polo a long time ago. Charles's uncle makes a scene with his entrance. The old man walks in with Susie on his side. The old man tells the cabin crew to go out because he wants to talk to his guests privately. He talks to all of his guests one by one, and it gets awkward when he comes to Nick and Audrey. The old man talks about his last will, and he cuts off everyone else and says all of his wealth will go to Susie. Grace walks out, and the old man continues to sign his will. The light turns off, and we hear gunshots. The light turns back on. Shockingly, the old man lays on the floor lifeless with a dagger plunged to his chest. Grace walks back into the room in full shock. The colonel pulls out the dagger from the old man, and Nick advises them to stop touching the crime scene. Toby checks if his father signed the will before he died, and he sees that he has not. Nick preserves the crime scene and tells the captain to secure the boat. Nick commands all of the guests to stay in their cabins for further investigation. Nick and Audrey try to figure out who is the killer. Audrey speculates that there must be two suspects because one needs to turn off the lights. Nick believes that the killer is the son, but Audrey argues that it is too obvious and not likely. They hear another gunshot across the room, and they find the son with the bullet wound through his head. The op boards and the French police investigate the crime scene. The chief inspector summons all of the guests for interrogation and asks them to describe the victim, and the inspectors ask them to describe the crime scene that happened. All of the guests say that they find Nick and Audrey the most suspicious. When it's time for Nick and Audrey's time for interrogation, the inspector shows them the typewritten suicide note of Tobey, and it contains Tobey's confession to the murder of his father. The inspector tells Nick and Audrey that they are the main suspects of the crime, and he suspects that somebody paid them to kill the old man. The inspector talks to Nick privately and tells him that he discovered Nick failed detective exams and says that Nick is highly suspicious. The inspector threatens Nick that he will not rest until he proves that Nick is a murderer. In Juan Carlos' race, Nick and Audrey continue to decipher the mystery. Audrey interviews Sergei, and she finds out that he is one of the kids of the old man. Audrey also discovers the French law that supposedly allows Sergei to inherit a part of his father's wealth, even if he is a bastard. Nick tells Vic that the colonel is publicizing that Vic is the killer. Vic tells Nick that Juan Carlos might be the killer, because Juan Carlos' father dies because of the old man. Audrey sees Susie sneezing and offers her allergy medication to sneak up a conversation. Susie tells Audrey that only Clarendon works for her, giving Audrey another opening for a conversation. Nick talks to Grace, and they both agree that Charles might be the killer. Nick and Audrey go to their hotel room and exchanges their clues about the murder. A person from outside slides a note in Nick and Audrey that tells them to come to the other suite. Nick prepares a lamp for his weapon, and they proceed to the room. Sergei points a gun at Nick and Audrey and tells them to listen to his confession. Nick says that he believes that the colonel killed the old man because the old man stole the colonel's wife. Afterward, the colonel's ex-wife died of childbirth. Sergei confesses that on the first day of the woman's death anniversary, the colonel told him that he wants revenge. A loud knock from the door interrupts the confession, and Sergei tells the couple to hide in the closet. The couple gets out of the closet and sees Sergei dying from gunshots. Nick and Audrey double lock the door and escape through the window. They pass by the colonel's bathroom and see him flossing. They enter a room and hide under the bed. Vic and Grace enter the room while kissing. Grace tries to get in the mood for a hormone game, but Vic ruins the mood. Grace walks out and Vic follows him, allowing Nick and Audrey to escape. Nick and Audrey go to a bar, and they continue exchanging ideas on who might be the killer. The couple sees their faces on the television, but they cannot understand it. They ask the waiter to translate the news for them. The waiter says that the news is saying that they are wanted in France for murder. The news is saying that Audrey is a hairdresser and Nick is a police officer. Audrey corrects that his husband is a detective, but the waiter says the news is announcing that Nick failed his detective exam a lot of times. Audrey discovers that her husband is lying to her, and she leaves Nick. Charles picks up Audrey as Nick observes from afar. Nick buys burner phones and works undercover. Nick follows Susie and contacts his friend Jimmy for a favor. At the same time, Charles leaves Audrey at his limo for a lawyer's appointment. Surprisingly, Audrey discovers a Japanese Clarendon on the limo, giving her an idea that Susie is collaborating with Charles. Audrey follows Charles to the library and she sees Nick. They conclude that Susie and Charles are collaborating. The mysterious killer is shooting bullets at Nick and Audrey. The couple defends themselves by pushing bookshelves. The couple goes out of the library and looks for Susie. They bump into Juan Carlo, and he helps them follow Susie. After they catch up with Susie, Susie gets shot with a dart from the killer with a mask. Nick and Juan chase the killer, while Nick throws a plate and successfully hits the killer. The inspector sees footage of Susie dying, and he heightens the national alert for Nick and Audrey. The inspector receives a call from Nick, and Nick tells him to meet at Charles' villa. When Nick and Audrey arrive at the villa, they see Charles dead with his eyes wide open and foam in his mouth. Audrey suspects that the killer puts poison on Charles's drink. The police arrive, and the couple still does not know who the real killer is. Nick and Audrey improvise that they know the murderer. The inspector tells Nick and Audrey that they will be tried in France according to French law. This sparks an idea to the couple, and the couple familiarizes the group about the French bastard law. They conclude that Grace is another bastard of the old man, and she kills all of her siblings to inherit all of her father's wealth. Nick proves this by revealing that Madeline has a scar from the plate that Nick threw at her. Nick injures Grace with a bullet, and the police arrest Grace. Vic reveals that Grace did not kill Sergey because she was with him the night Sergey was killed. They figure out Juan Carlos is collaborating with Grace, and they chase Juan Carlos. Juan Carlos tries to get away with a police vehicle, and Audrey races with him. Audrey catches up with Juan Carlos. Juan Carlos crashes into a statue, and he is still alive. Juan Carlos points a gun at Nick, and unfortunately, a bus hits Juan Carlos. The movie ends with the inspector commending Nick, and the inspector promises that he will tell Nick's superior about his impressive work. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your fun for today.